Hello, I'm Mary Victoria Dombrowski. Welcome to episode 10 of War and Magic. Government bodies, even well-intentioned ones, can get it wrong. As recently as May of 2005, in the building behind me, the City Council unanimously passed Resolution 2005-22. That city resolution declared unconstitutional President Roosevelt's Executive Order 9066 of 1942. Was the City Council unaware that only the United States Supreme Court can make that determination? As of today, the executive order remains good law, as evidenced most recently in discussions during congressional hearings on the nomination of Justice Samuel Alito to the United States Supreme Court. Our guest today on War and Magic speaks passionately about another time that government got it wrong. In 1988, Dr. Howard Garber traveled to Washington, D.C. to hit hard and make news. His target? Public Law 100-383. PL 100-383 was based entirely on the flawed personal justice denied, which in its discussion of the 1942 evacuation included not one single mention of the magic intelligence upon which FDR depended in making his decision to declare the West Coast a war zone. But PL 100-383 passed into law as the so-called Civil Rights Act of 1988. This act appropriated $1.25 billion for payments, firstly to relocated and interned ethnic Japanese, and more significantly for us today, for public education. Today, in 2006, we see the results of Congress's misdirected liberality. Here are two examples. Federally funded curricula for school children which tell half-truths, and memorials calculated to include only part of the World War II story. And United States taxpayers are funding the historical revisionism that Dr. Garber calls an outrage. To put it succinctly, the role of the legislature is to legislate, not re-educate.
Hello, I'm Carolyn Goad, and this is the second part of our interview with Dr. Howard Garber, a victims' rights advocate and a political activist. We're in Seattle today to speak with him about certain issues concerning the Japanese relocation. Well, let's go back a step, Dr. Garber. Can you talk about the reasons for the relocation to begin with?
Well, first of all, you have to understand that in this particular area dealing with what happened right after Pearl Harbor, December 7, 1941, the United States was totally unprepared. Militarily, we were unprepared, and it was a sneak attack, okay? And our West Coast, particularly our West Coast, was vulnerable. As a matter of fact, there was a Japanese submarine just off of Bakersfield, California, Goleta, bombarded the oil well in that area. And in a crash program we had in San Francisco, they had sandbags around the buildings. We have pictures of that, and we were all set for being bombed by aircraft and that type of thing. There were balloons that were used to carry bombs. They weren't very effective. But when it came to defending the coast, the President Franklin Roosevelt, on February 19th, it didn't happen a day or a week later, but on February 19th, 1942, came out with his exclusion order. And the distinction, the only distinction between, let's say, we're talking about on December 11th, war was declared by Germany and Italy against the United States. So first war on December 8th was declared against Japan. And Japan, there in the Pacific, and the West Coast was vulnerable. The Japanese Americans here were not considered by Japan, and this is an important point. The Japanese nation did not consider American citizenship. Even though they were born here, they did not recognize American citizenship. One of the proofs of that, the Japanese Americans that found themselves in Japan at that time, the males that were of draft age, were conscripted into the Japanese military, either the Army or the Navy, whether they liked it or not. They took Americans and they fought for Japan. So that was unique for Japan, not for Germany or Italy. So and also the Japanese, of all the enemies, were the only ones that had dual citizenship. And as I said before, at Tule Lake, 18,000 Japanese Americans wanted to fight for Japan. So because of the dual citizenship situation, and because of our belief that there was, let's say, espionage, certainly there was in Hawaii and on the West Coast, primarily by Japanese, possibly Japanese Americans, we chose to, let's say, have this exclusion order, which didn't even mention the Japanese. It was to exclude enemies by virtue of national and international law. At the time of war, enemy nationals from Japan, from Italy, and Germany automatically became enemy aliens, okay? So that was the reason for the Exclusion Act, and as I said, the West Coast became a red zone. It was challenged. The Korematsu case was one case. I think there were other cases. It was the key case, and it was upheld 6-3 by the U.S. Supreme Court, including some of the liberal judges like Douglas, and he went along with the president. So as times changed and we swallowed this historical revisionism, now you hear even bright attorneys, I debated with one of them, saying, well, that was reversed. It was never reversed. The only court that can reverse a Supreme Court decision would be the Supreme Court itself. The Supreme Court never reversed President Franklin Roosevelt's exclusion order. I guess the nation as a whole and the Congress doesn't see any great benefit of rehashing whether it's atrocities of that period or some of the falsified facts of that period. So that's why a person, a great broadcaster like George Putnam said it's a dead horse, this issue of trying to bring out the truth and show the real picture of what Japanese Americans, many of them, certainly not all of them, but too big a proportion that we couldn't take any chances during that period where we were trying to survive against Nazi Germany and fascist imperialistic Japan.
Howard, certain people in the Japanese American community say that because they stand out look-wise, ethnicity and so on, that they could never have been spies, and that the Germans were hired to be spies in America. Can you address that issue?
Well, it's almost an absurdity to make that kind of a statement, because during that period, and I happen to have been living back in Ohio at that time, and that's where I graduated from high school, and even not being on the West Coast, we knew all about, from the time, I guess it was 1933, when Japan went into Manchukuo, now Manchuria, and did the terrible, atrocious things that it did to the Chinese people. I mentioned before the rape of Nanking, 340,000 primarily women and children butchered. And so are they saying that our picture of the Japanese was that of people that wouldn't do that kind of thing? They went all the way down through Asia, down to Burma. And the point is, during the 30s, you know, we had many in this country that were isolationists. Okay, we were late in getting into it. Vandenberg of Michigan, for example, was one of the key isolationists. I don't think he was prepared to go to war, even if we had been invaded from the West End and the East Coast. So, you know, you had some individuals that just are opposed to war, you know, irrespective of the consequences. But as far as the Japanese, they had proved in terms of what they did to the other Asian countries, and as far as them being recognized, come on now. The Chinese, as far as most of us are concerned, are very often, let's say, thought they look so similar to Japanese. But as far as the racist part of it, were we racist to be on the side of the Chinese and all of the Filipinos, and the side of all of the other Asians? If we were racist, why weren't we racist against the other Asians? The fact is we were not, and the fact is Japan deserved everything that we threw at them in order to, let's say, initially defend ourselves and then to defeat them unconditionally, and that's the only way they could have been defeated. So, you know, as far as their fifth column activities, didn't they invade the Aleutian Islands? Weren't they prepared to come on down through the Aleutians, down the west coast? Come on now. I mean, what does it take to know what they planned, what they had in mind? It's all documented. We just don't want to bring this all up again, as I said before, because the Japanese won't like it. Maybe it'll ruin our trade relations with them.
Can you comment on the idea that cryptologists played a key role in the prosecution of the war with Japan?
Well, I can't think of anything more important than our first knowledge when the Freedom of Information Act was passed in this country following World War II, where we came to know about a secret code called MAGIC, okay? And it was extremely important in terms of our ultimate victory in World War II. The Japanese did not know that we had broken their code and into all kinds of areas. But I'm merely saying that I believe that was the basis for the 8-volume publication that came out afterward, after the Freedom of Information Act, by the Department of Defense, that went to all aspects of it, some of which we covered in terms of espionage, fifth column espionage, going right down the west coast, down to South America, that the Japanese were engaged in. That was not known until MAGIC was, all of this was known about after MAGIC. So that was a very important breakthrough. But you mentioned along with it that you did want to know about our organized effort, that is AFA, Americans for Historical Accuracy. We never got around to, we wanted to incorporate it and go national with it. And Lillian, until her final days, wished to do that, and I was acting as her secretary and trying to get that thing going. And we went to Washington twice. The first time we had a press conference to deal with the upcoming legislation. We called it the so-called Apology Reparations Act. We met again at the time, it was in 1989, when we appeared. First we submitted testimony, 10 pages of written testimony, each of us, that was to appear before the Congressional Subcommittee on Appropriations. Neil Smith was the chairman. And the day before we were to appear, we understood that Congressman Mineta and Congressman Matsui, these were two Japanese-American legislators, were to also appear before his committee. Well, it turned out they both spoke for, I'm going to guess and say it was about 20 minutes. We were limited to 5 minutes, coming from the West Coast, almost 3,000 miles there, 3,000 miles there, to speak 5 minutes. So the evening before, Lillian Baker wanted to know what we were going to present. She wanted us to kind of read our notes within 5 minutes so that we wouldn't waste time. And I told Lillian that she came here to hit hard and make news, and that I didn't expect to stop at 5 minutes, and I had nothing prepared. I was just going to speak, as I normally do, in a very hard-hitting fashion on what I believe to be the truth here, the outrageous facts dealing with falsification of American history, which I did. I identified myself at that time. When I was finally called upon, I had a recorder in my pocket, so it's all on audio tape. I spoke for 14 minutes, not 5, but 14 minutes, until I was finally gavelled down. But I said I was going to speak until the Sergeant of Arms grabbed me and got me out of there. We found out that day before that Congressman Mineta and Congressman Matsui were to speak before the committee, and we felt outraged that they were going to get if the bill was passed, not only were they to get $20,000 each, and also Congressman Matsunaga of Senator Matsunaga of Hawaii was there. He would be also a recipient of those monies. Typed up a formal statement to the committee to be read or to be considered prior to our, let's say, testimony. And it spelled out clearly. You'll get a copy of it. It was signed by Lillian Baker, myself, and Bill Kubick, who was with us. And it stated, in effect, what I just said, that they were to testify, and it was a conflict because they were going to be recipients of those monies referred to in the bill, $20,000 apiece, plus $20,000 to all members of their families. Okay? A clear and outrageous conflict of interest. Well, Neil Smith, the chairman, was very annoyed that we were coming up with this, that we wanted this to be considered before all of the testimony. We wanted him to let the committee know and the audience know that we were being heard conditioned on our statement that we were objecting to their appearance, and they appeared before us. PL 10383, as far as I'm concerned, did not provide for $20,000 for all of the ones that were enemies of this country in internment camps, because they had charges, criminal charges brought against them for espionage or for things related to that. 590 after the war, we sent them back to Japan, expelled them. They were expelled from this nation. They went back to Japan. Each of them, believe it or not, was given by this permissive United States the same $20,000 per individual. The first checks written by the Attorney General of this country went to those individuals. I succeeded in getting the attention of CNN that was there, and wound up within a short period of time on Crossfire, a national program, and then on Larry King Live on these subjects.
Congressman Mineta went on to be appointed by Presidential Commission to be Secretary of Transportation. Can you comment on that?
Yes, I think he was the worst possible nominee for that position. And as I said, I don't remember right offhand whether it was President Clinton, but he's been retained. He has continued to be Secretary of Transportation, and again, for a number of reasons, and certainly one of the most important reasons is his testimony on PL 10383 opposing what he says we did in those days, put Japanese Americans in concentration camps. But he went on as Secretary of Transportation to oppose, during this wartime period, some of the kinds of things we had to do in World War II. He didn't seem to recognize that in wartime, a nation, to survive against enemies, and we certainly have a global enemy today, must do what it must do to preserve and protect itself. And so he has blocked efforts to promote the Patriot Act, to give the FBI and other agencies of government the powers to act against our internal and external enemies. This is not a Secretary of Transportation that is, let's say, beneficial to us in this period. He, for example, is against racial profiling. He's thinking back on those days, I guess, of World War II, when we dealt with Japanese Americans in the way we did. And I believe he's also against other provisions of the Patriot Act, like computerized data banks, wiretapping, and other things that are absolutely necessary in wartime. He is a permissive Secretary of Transportation, totally inappropriate during this wartime period. Wartime period. And then I'll put a period at that.
Dr. Garber, thank you again for being with us, and we appreciate your time on your visit to Seattle from California.
Well, I appreciate your doing this interview and giving me the opportunity to speak out on what I consider some outrageous falsification of American history.
Well, thank you again. I'm Carolyn Goad in Seattle with Dr. Howard Garber, and thank you for watching.